1959. The 9 Russian adventurers, 7 men and 2 women, all highly skilled cross-country skiers, had been dead for nearly a month by the time the rescue team helicoptered to the isolated Dyatlov Pass in late February. Nothing in the scene felt right. The husk of the explorer's tent had been cut open from the inside, revealing rucksacks, neatly organized footwear, and a platter of sliced hog fat. The victims were discovered about a half-mile downslope from their camp, several of them barefoot and nearly naked. The primary cause of death was hypothermia. Temperatures were likely well below 0 degrees Fahrenheit the night they fled, but 2 of the victims were missing their eyes and another her tongue. 4 of them had suffered serious head and chest damage, as if they'd been in a vehicle accident. These were not injuries typical of avalanche fatalities. What became known as the Dyatlov Pass Incident sparked numerous conspiracy theories throughout the years. The fact that some of the adventurers' garments had signs of radioactivity suggests that the Russians were forced to flee to an ice death by aliens, or perhaps a Yeti wandered into the camp, or, more likely, the local people were offended by the group's presence on their property. Ultimately, none of these were especially compelling to the Russian authorities, which officially blamed an avalanche as the reason despite the odd circumstances. Scientists say they have new evidence to back up that assertion, but with a twist: the killer was most likely a strange type of avalanche, inspired by prior work that replicated realistic snow for the Disney film Frozen. The researchers calculated how a relatively small avalanche may have struck the camp, causing the adventurers to leave and injuring some of them seriously. The cross-country skiers had set up a basic camp, simply one tent into which they'd all packed side by side to sleep. Sometime before nightfall on February 1, 1959, investigators collected the group's cameras and discovered an image of the pitched tent in daylight. So we know this timeline. We also know that the group departed rapidly at night, as demonstrated by the cut in the tent. Perhaps hurriedly done if people trapped inside couldn't breathe, then the fact that the rescue squad collected lamps near the shelter. Researchers have a few lines of evidence regarding the campers' deaths. Without body heat to keep it warm, a person's watch stops ticking roughly an hour after death in such frigid temperatures, estimated to be 13 degrees Fahrenheit based on measurements from the closest weather stations. 3 of the adventurers' watches stopped between the hours of 8 and 9 a.m., while another stopped at 5:31 a.m. The maximum survival period for an exposed human wearing little clothes is likewise determined by the temperature in this situation. The window should have been 2 to 3 hours. Finally, the victim's stomach contents revealed that they had not eaten in 6 to 8 hours. Putting everything together, the skiers set up camp before nighttime, escaped between 1:30 and 5:30, and died between 4:30 and 7:30 in the morning. This doesn't make sense if you're picturing a regular avalanche. For one thing, the rescue team saw no evidence of a large shift of snow. They had readily identified the tent, which was not severely covered. Furthermore, the average slope around the tent was 23 degrees, much below the 30-degree incline required by scientists to initiate an avalanche. The adventurers had hacked into the snow to level out a spot when they first set up camp. However, detectives discovered that the campers did not flee for at least 9 hours after making that incision. If the cut had caused an avalanche, the slide should have happened right away. There had been no snowfall on that night. After midnight, enough weight had accumulated above the weak layer for it to suddenly collapse, launching the slab into the tent. It would have been a modest avalanche, perhaps 16 feet by 16 feet, that the researchers simulated using the Disney snow model. It would have been enough to fill the hole dug by the campers in the snow, but not enough to allow the rescue crew to find clear evidence of an avalanche 26 days later. However, an avalanche does not have to be enormous to cause serious harm to the human body. Hikers who become entangled in one are likely to suffocate. None of the 9 victims died from asphyxia in this case, and some had serious chest and head damage. The physics of the slab avalanche and the downward winds can also explain this. Even though it wasn't snowing at the time of the occurrence, the katabatic winds would have created a much more dangerous type of deposit above the tent. The wind was eroding and transporting the snow, which was made up of very small crystals. And then, when it deposits, the crystals are highly compacted. This may have resulted in a solid slab of snow weighing around 25 pounds per cubic foot. Even worse, our adventurers had used their skis as a floor for their tent, creating a hard substrate for the snow to crush them against. The researchers calculated how much snow could have accumulated above the tent in such conditions. They used data from historical automobile industry accident testing done on human cadavers rather than dummies to calibrate their simulation. To be fair, it was the 1970s, and it was a different era. They then compared the crash test outcomes to the release of virtual snow blocks of various sizes onto a digital model of a human body. The damage caused by a meter-wide chunk of snow is depicted below. They deduced from this that the mountaineers survived the initial crush of snow, cutting their way out of the tent, despite the fact that several of them were gravely hurt. But if they'd avoided a tiny avalanche, why would they flee nearly a half-mile away instead of staying to dig up their goods, particularly their boots? Investigators discovered that the gang had actually stored other supplies in the forest, suggesting that they had set out for them in a panic. There was an avalanche, and you might be afraid of another one. As a result, they may have concluded that the best choice would be to travel to the forest, start a fire, and try to find the supplies. They didn't last more than a few hours in the freezing cold because they were dressed so lightly. They had no way of knowing the precise mechanics of a slab avalanche, and despite their shock, it might have been safe to dig up their provisions and go on. It appears to me that an avalanche is the most plausible explanation for the situation, says Jordy Hendricks, a snow avalanche expert at Montana State University, who was not involved in the new research. Back in 1959, researchers had a much narrower grasp of how avalanches worked. They didn't comprehend, for example, that under the correct conditions, an avalanche can travel down a slope of less than 30 degrees. Authorities initially suspected locals of murdering the adventurers, and if an avalanche didn't seem likely, why not consider the supernatural? I think aliens and yetis are fun ideas, Hendricks says. And given the circumstances, the Soviet Union, known for their information transparency, so I can see why these crazy theories have come together. While this new slab avalanche idea has scientific rigor, it is still just that, a theory. After all, there were no eyewitnesses.